Hello and welcome to our weekly IG Live. We are going to be talking today with Maya Payne Smart, and she is actually the headliner of the Louisville Book Festival this year, which is actually coming up very soon. And so it's really exciting that we get to have her on the program. She is a really terrific speaker. She's an educator. She's a literacy advocate and literacy expert. There she is. And she's written a really wonderful book that she's going to be talking about at the conference, at the book festival. She'll tell us all about that and also about why is early childhood literacy so important? Why is it something we really need to be focusing on with our children, especially young children? And then, we talk a lot about community here. What is the connection between community and literacy? How can literacy help us build a more equitable society, which is, I think, is a really interesting concept. So we're going to be talking to her about that. If you haven't looked at her website or read her book, she has a lot of really great tips about how you can help your children learn how to read, and of course, just why it's so important, and also what we can be doing as parents and as educators to make sure we're setting a good example for our children. Hold on just a minute. I see that she is on here. I don't know. Are you having some trouble joining? I've invited you to join, or you can request to join. Might be, sometimes that works better. There we go. Sometimes that's a little easier. Hello.
Hi, how are you?
Good. Thank you. Thank you for taking the time to join us. Excuse me. I was just talking a little bit about your work, but maybe you could introduce yourself and what it is that you do.
Yes, I'm Maya Smart. I'm the author of Reading for Our Lives, a literacy action plan from birth to six, which is a guide that really gives parents insights into how to nurture, teach, and advocate for their children on the road to reading. So super excited.
Oh, I think we just lost your sound for some reason. Yeah, that's a really interesting topic. And why is it that literacy is so important? Why should we be focusing on this?
Literacy is so important because it really is the skill that enables a lot of other skills. So once a child can read well, they have access to all of the wisdom that's in all of the books and online, and they'll be able to teach themselves so many other things. So I think it's just sort of a doorway to the things that kids want to accomplish in school and in careers and even in their lives in terms of their relationships with other people or working on initiatives in the community. So it's one of those core kind of foundational things that many people take for granted, but there's so much research that shows that someone's literacy achievement is correlated with all kinds of things, including their health, things like likelihood of incarceration. So it's really something that touches every aspect of our lives.
Wow, I didn't know that research about, even connecting to likelihood of incarceration. What do you think it is? Why do you think that we are not as focused on literacy, or do you think that we are, but we just don't have the right tools to help our children? What do you think is the gap that we have?
I think that there needs to be a lot more education about the things that support literacy in the years before kids are in schools. So there's so much research about early learning and infant brain development and how things that are going on with kids as babies and toddlers affect their learning and literacy prospects years down the road. So I think we start thinking about reading often in the school years, and we should start thinking about it sooner. And there needs to be more parent education about things that don't look like reading that support reading. So things like how we talk to babies and toddlers that build the vocabulary and background knowledge that helps them make sense of the words and ideas in books down the road.
Interesting. So I think you're right. I think a lot of parents, we don't think about reading until school age or maybe preschool age, but you're saying it starts much earlier than that and doesn't even necessarily look like reading.
Absolutely. So one of the studies that I read that really left a big impression on me was a longitudinal study that looked at 18 to 20-month-old children initially and measured all of their early language environment. So the conversations that they were having with adults and older children and people in their lives. And they found that those that had the highest back and forth conversations, those exchanges, and really that duet, it's the back and forth, not just the adult talking to the child, but the child articulating and communicating back, that those kids years later had much larger vocabularies as middle schoolers. They had bigger vocabularies, they had better language abilities, they even had higher IQs. So it was really eye-opening for me, this connection between early language and literacy, because reading isn't just about matching sounds to letters on the page, it's about understanding the words that make up the sentences and paragraphs and understanding the ideas. And so there's the decoding bit, but there's also a lot of oral language knowledge that kids need to thrive and make sense of the reading they'll do as they age.
Right. So even you're saying even just the ways we talk to very young children, but you're also, can you talk a little bit more about, you said it's not just the adults talking to the children, but having that duet. What does that look like, or what would that be like, especially when they're so young? I know I used to read in parenting books about how you should always talk to your babies, and I felt so silly because I knew they didn't really understand what I was saying, and it's not like they could talk back. So what does that actually look like when you're talking about such young children?
It's super important. And I also did not know. I think I talked to my daughter some, but definitely would have done it more if I had read this research.
Right.
But the idea is that long before they can speak back to us with actual words and sentences, that we are in communication with them. And that when we speak sentences and ask questions, their coos and babbles, their eye gaze, their pointing, their gestures, all of those things are communication. And so it's really important for us to treat it as conversation and pause and ask questions and give them an opportunity to respond. One of the acronyms that I use in the book is called TALK. And the T is for taking turns, just to remind us not just to narrate what we're doing and drone on, but to direct conversation, direct sentences, direct questions to them. The A is ask questions. And I think naturally, if you ask a baby a question, or if you ask anyone a question, you're going to pause and wait for their response. And so that contributes to the first one of taking turns. The L is labeling and pointing, because sometimes you don't know what to say to the baby. You don't know what they're thinking or what they're interested in necessarily, but you can point to things in your environment, in the grocery store, in your house, or your backyard. This is grass, it's green, it's pointy, feel the grass. And so you're kind of providing vocabulary when you label things, and then when you're pointing, you're bringing their attention in line with yours so that they know what you're talking about. And then the K is just keep the conversation going. So I think if parents keep those things in mind, take turns, ask questions, label and point, and keep the conversation going, they're doing a lot of really valuable work to lay a strong foundation for future reading. There's some other things you'll have to do to help them make the connection between print and the sounds that they hear, but building a strong base of vocabulary is wonderful.
Yeah, and I don't want to take away, because people really should go read your book. So I don't want you to take away from people doing that. But it's good just to have that shift in perspective, because yeah, like I just felt kind of silly, and I wasn't, and also I felt like I wasn't getting. I was told to talk to my baby, but I didn't feel like I had a lot of direction about it as far as what that was actually supposed to be like or feel like. So that's really helpful, and to know that it makes such a difference.
It really does, because all of those words, particularly when they're first learning to read, they're not going to understand what's on the page if they haven't heard those words in conversation. So they need us to tell them the shapes and the colors, but they also need just those everyday words: table, chair, door, window, and names and directions up and down, and all these. We just have to think of ourselves as kids' number one vocabulary teachers. And in the beginning, you'll use the same word for objects over and over and over again until they kind of get it. And then there comes a point where you start introducing synonyms and using more interesting kind of words to describe things to build their vocabulary further. But talk, talk, talk.
Yeah, and so you also I know you've mentioned that we as parents and educators need to elevate our own habits. Could you talk a little bit more about that?
Yes, I think that we don't get a lot of instruction for parenting. I remember doing weeks and weeks of childbirth planning and reading books and taking classes and learning all of these techniques just to kind of get through labor.
Right.
And it was super important and helpful, and I'm glad I did it.
Right.
And then you get instruction on breastfeeding, and you get instruction on installing the car seat and all these kind of things, but no one teaches you how to support your child's brain development.
Right.
No one teaches you how to provide background information, build vocabulary, and how to teach kind of the nuts and bolts foundational things to help them be great readers. So I think definitely as parents, we have to seek out the resources that we need and not assume that we know what to do, because some of these things are counterintuitive, like talking to babies that can't respond to you.
Right. Yeah. Definitely. And I'm sure it also doesn't make a difference if the kids are seeing us reading. I mean, if we're, doing more to promote our own literacy or continue that, setting that example for them. Although I know that's really hard when there's I mean, when do you find time to just sit down with a book? But does that really affect them? Yes, do that?
I think it's good to have books in your home to read in front of your child, but just know that you reading in front of them is not teaching them to read. And so when it gets to the point when they're at an age where you can start to point out letters and talk about them, or drag your finger across a page as you're reading with them, so they learn that text goes from left to right or top to bottom. So there's modeling reading, and then there's teaching reading. And so I think it's important for them to see you read, yes, but I think it's more important for you to read with them, engage with them, talk to them about the books that you're reading, and do all those more direct, interactive things.
And what do you do if you have a child who doesn't seem very interested in reading? You sit down, maybe you do your bedtime stories or whenever you do it, and they seem like they're not even paying attention. Should you just persist, or is there something you can do?
I think you should definitely continue trying to establish that daily reading habit, particularly if they're very young. And you may just try to shorten the stories. Some kids just keep their attention span in mind. And with babies and toddlers, just a couple minutes may be enough. And that remember that you're, one, modeling the importance of reading by establishing that habit with them, but there are also opportunities to teach little things about how books work, or about letters, and again, even if they're not looking at the page and they're hearing the story, they are learning some of those words and just the structure of the language. So they are still getting something out of it. So I'd say persist in doing it, but keep in mind that there may be some sort of a reason why they're not interested. Some cases may want to try different kinds of books. So it could be the subject matter, or maybe it's they just don't want to sit still.
Right.
But definitely,
right.
Definitely keep an eye on the developmental milestones. There are things like the CDC and other organizations that publish those, and it'll give you a feel for the kinds of things that kids can do at certain ages and stages. So the number of words they're speaking, or their ability to focus on certain things. And then if you have questions, use your pediatrician as a resource to get a feel for if something is a real challenge or a sign that there might be an issue with reading interest or reading development down the road. So definitely listen to your intuition if you feel like there's a challenge, but otherwise just kind of persist in establishing that habit for you of reading, and for them of engaging.
That's a great reminder about the pediatrician, because I think a lot of times we tend to think of it as more like physical health, and not so much to think of a pediatrician as a resource if we think there's something going on, more like a mental challenge.
Absolutely. And they're a great resource for referring you to specialists. So a child might have a hearing issue that is, interfering with their interest in the story. There might be a speech issue. There might be all kinds of things going on. And your pediatrician is kind of that first line of specialist who then can direct you in other areas to get other resources.
And so up till now, we've been talking more about what you can do with your child and that kind of one-on-one relationship. But I was also really intrigued when you talked about the connection between literacy and community building, and that when we have better literacy as a community, that actually we can help build a more equitable society. Could you talk more about that?
Yes, I think there is sometimes a misconception when we read news articles about reading disparities and
Mhm.
equity issues and sort of reading results that they're worse than they once were. And in some cases, among certain demographics, that's true. But it's also the case that we've always had millions and millions of people who were illiterate or functionally illiterate, having major, major reading challenges. So it really would be something new for us to create a society in which the majority of people really did read well. So I
Mhm.
think it's hard for people who are fluent, skilled readers to imagine what it's like to navigate life without those skills. And
Right.
so it doesn't, they can't really even conceive of how dramatically that limits your career prospects and like your
Mhm.
ability to take care of yourself and your family. So I think if we get serious about using all of the wonderful tools that we have, the knowledge that we have, the research that's been done about how people learn to read, and if we find ways to give every child what they need prior to the school years, and then with the proper curriculum and support and intervention and tutoring when they get to the school years, we could create something we've never had, a fully literate society where everyone has the opportunity to fulfill their potential and make an impact.
Right. That's amazing to think about. And that's it's a good reminder too. Like you said, I mean, that's something we've never had before.
Yeah, I think we read these statistics and they are bad.
Yeah.
And they're getting worse. There have been impacts from COVID, for example.
Right.
So, there have been teacher shortages. There were a lot of experienced reading teachers who retired from schools. There have been curriculum challenges and training challenges, getting people up to speed to do the things we know need to be done in the classroom. And there are funding shortages that prevent there from being sufficient tutoring and other supports and
Right.
interventions offered to kids. So
Mhm.
we just have to keep all of those things in mind, but also have that long-term perspective that it hasn't been done before. So we're going to have to do new things
Right.
to
Uh-huh.
get to full literacy. So we have to do the obvious things, like teach people appropriately. We
Right.
have to assess kids earlier and more frequently to identify the challenges they're having and then provide the appropriate tutoring and supports. But then we also need to do this whole range of things prior to the school years to support parents in having the kind of nurturing back and forth conversations kids need,
Mhm.
having paid parental leave so that they can be home and engage with kids, and all these different policy things.
Hmm. Which is really a shift at a societal level that we're thinking, like you said, of providing more support for parents, for example, so that they can take on this really important role.
Yes, because we kind of have this backwards way of playing catch up. I remember when my daughter was born, reading articles talking about how kids have been labeled behind when they entered kindergarten. And it's like, how can you be behind at the start of your formal education when no one educated anyone in your life on what they needed to do to
Right.
get you ready for school? And so the advice that parents are given, have books around the house, read to them every day is excellent. Those are great things, but there's so much more we can do, and things that we can do when we don't have a book in hand, when we're walking, when we're driving, when we're changing diapers, when we're preparing meals. So we have to get serious about showing parents their power
Mhm.
and helping them do all these little things that are easily incorporated into everyday life that have just an extraordinary impact.
Right. And I think also maybe encouraging parents that like you said, it's something you can just easily incorporate into your routine, because I think sometimes parents, they have so much on them, especially those early years when they're still figuring things out, that they're like, oh, one more thing I have to worry about. But like you said, it's something that you're already changing the diaper, you're already going to walk, with a stroller, or however you do it, that it's not, it's more just guiding what you're already doing, like adding, as you're doing it.
Right. And sometimes it can give you a little more purpose
Hmm.
and sense of mission and excitement when you're doing all of those things, when you're changing like the 2000th diaper.
It makes it a little more fulfilling, I think, than just changing diapers. That's a good point.
And then it also, I think, it makes you more attuned to what's going on with the child when you have these developmental milestones in mind, or when you have one of the chapters in the book lists all the different ages and stages and different book behaviors.
Mm-hmm.
So it's fun for parents to know that it's totally appropriate that your baby is chewing the book or throwing the book or kind of like swatting at the book, that is part of their learning and development and growth. And then you'll kind of tune into those things and note it, sometimes put it in a journal, make a little note in your phone, and you'll kind of tune into all the learning and development that's happening, because we forget how we don't remember being babies and how we learned anything and how new and overwhelming yet exciting everything was. But if we can remember that they have to learn all this stuff, they have to learn the difference between a letter and a number, or a letter and just a squiggle on a piece of paper. And we can tune into that and be excited by all the little steps they take on the road to reading.
Well, I'm just curious. I know we're coming up on time, so I'll try to keep it brief. But I would love to know, how did you get so passionate? What sparked your interest in literacy, and that it's kind of become your passion?
It was really, I've always loved to read. So if I could have had a job just reading books, that would have been
Yeah.
that would have been my profession. Like, not even writing about them, just reading them and enjoying them. So that reading is my number one hobby thing I enjoy to do. So when I had my daughter, I really wanted her to love books and be excited about books in the same way that I was. And I didn't have any memories. I was an early reader, so I didn't have any memories of learning to read or being taught to read. I remember at school age already reading. And my dad said that when I was really little, I would get frustrated when I was read to, because I just wanted to do it myself. Right. So someone taught me to read at some point, probably in preschool, but I don't remember the details of it. So I didn't feel, I'm a detail person, so I didn't feel equipped to teach my daughter when I didn't remember being taught or have any training in how to do it. So it really just began with that just personal interest in teaching my daughter and wanting to know how all this worked, combined with reading those news articles that talked about disparities among lower socioeconomic kids or higher socioeconomic kids, or Black kids and white kids. And as a Black mom, I want to know, well, why are Black children struggling so much to learn to read? So it's just having those questions, doing a lot of reading, and then using my journalism skills to interview experts in not just education, but in reading research and in psychology and in neuroscience and all these different things. So that was really, it's just kind of like my personal questions. Right. And I just kept asking the questions.
Oh, that's wonderful. And so I have to ask, how old is your daughter now, and does she love to read?
She does. She'll say she doesn't love to do it as much as I do, but there's still time. So she's 11 and a middle schooler. So there are different challenges at different ages and stages when it comes to reading and reading interest. But the cool thing with an older child who can read fluently and is a skilled reader is she now is able to explore and find the books that she's interested in. She can go to the school library, have those conversations with the librarian, or read descriptions of books, and she can find what she's interested in, and she can, nonfiction, fiction, all the things. So our kids don't have to read like we read or be interested in the same kind of books, but we want to be able to help them get to their next level and help them connect with the topics and authors that they can be passionate about.
Well, and like you said, if we lay that foundation early on, then by the time they get to your daughter's age, they already have the skills and they can branch out and start to explore on their own.
Absolutely. And they read in different ways in this world as a result of all the technology they're exposed to. So she reads different kinds of things than I did at that age. She reads a lot of reviews. Why? Because she has online access to go look things up and compare and contrast and see what people have written about different things that she's interested in. So I find that it's just different. And so we have to be open to whatever kind of reading they're doing, even if it's an instruction manual or game directions for some board game they want to play.
Interesting. So I wish we had like another hour, because I have so many questions about that, but that is a good place to leave it, because that means that people need to, they need to go see you at the Louisville Book Festival, which everybody go check that out. That's coming up very soon. And that we all need to go get your book. So thank you for joining us. This is such an interesting conversation, and I think so important for any parent that's watching, or even if you're not a parent, if you're a grandparent, you have other children in your life. This is such an important topic. So thank you for coming and taking the time to talk with us.
Thank you so much. This is my first Instagram Live, so I'm excited to have this opportunity opportunity to chat about books with you today.
Oh, very exciting. Thank you. And for anybody that's just joining us, this is going to be up on Instagram in a few minutes, and I will have it up on the YouTube channel later on today. Thank you. Bye.
Thanks. Have a great day. Bye-bye.
You too.